as it turns out, the big narrative that I got chosen for my kind of story, my episode was called There Will Be Blood. And it was all about me actually getting my menstrual cycle when I was on this survival challenge. It became this big blow up thing. It was like one of the most played clips in the whole season. I used it as an opportunity to talk really openly about the somatics of it, you know, how we can connect to the land in this really embodied way as women.
I'd like to welcome Brittany Jane Laidlaw to the podcast. I have known Brittany for quite a long time now. We were just discussing before when was the last time we saw each other in person? And
yeah, over a decade.
Over a decade ago. Brittany is a somatic ecologist. You are the founder of the Earth Framework.
Yes, correct.
There's another thing that I wanted to mention on here that I didn't quite know, which was, I know you're a rewilding mentor, but a soul midwife. So I want to discuss that a little bit as well. Mm-hmm. And you are also on a TV show called Naked and Afraid. Is that correct?
Yes. All the wild things that I do.
So yeah, I've known Brittany for a long time, and one of the memories that I have is we used to be in permaculture groups and a lot of gardening and things like that. And I used to live in Surfers Paradise in an apartment block. And I decided I was going to reclaim the council land out the front. And Brittany and a group of people came and we pretty much just reclaimed this garden, this land, and made it into a garden. And it was really quite funny because all the people in the unit block was like, you can't do that. I was like, no one's really using the land. I'm just going to claim it. And I grew all my veggies for free and it was great. And that was kind of my experience with Brittany. Is she's one of those people that likes to get her hands dirty and into the soil. So I'd love to know a little bit about kind of what got you to where you are today. What were some of those major either life-altering experiences that kind of shifted you in this direction, or have you always been like this?
I definitely have not always been like this. And firstly, just want to say thank you for having me on. It's a gift to be able to share this with you and also to connect after all this time. Such a wonderful memory for me of doing a bit of a perma blitz on your place in the middle of Surfers Paradise.
Yeah.
Oh, that was a nice trip down memory lane.
All the cars driving past on the highway. We're just like,
that's it. So I came from a very, I would say, nature-centric family, but not on a farm setting or anything like that. We were still very urban. But my mum was a surfer, and so with a single mum with 4 kids, it was kind of free entertainment to go to the beach all the time, and great for her. And my dad was from New Zealand, and so he used to take me out camping and things like that. So I had a pretty urban upbringing, but there was still that value for nature. But I kind of think that was just a little bit more normal in the 90s as part of childhood, because we didn't have the influence of all the technology that we have today. So relatively normal, and I didn't have a family that would talk about these concepts of soul and purpose and ecosomatics and healing and transformation. It was just like so not in my world, not even meditation or anything like that. And so my journey, very similar to many, many people that I know have ended up on this path, or whether it be leading or just practicing, is my journey started through trauma. I went through some really challenging experiences in my youth, and probably when I was about 18 or so, I hit my kind of transition point of I have to either leave and get out of this environment, or I'm going to fully collapse and kind of self-implode. And it was a really hard decision because I was working really, really intensively on my dance career at that time. I had a degree invitation to do WAPA, which is the West Australian Academy of Performing Arts, where like Hugh Jackman and I'm pretty sure maybe Nicole Kidman, or a lot of these big Australian actors and people that have made it big went there as part of their training. And so to be invited to, be successful in the audition is really a big deal. And so I got into WAPA, I was doing my dance, and still even though I was, every day pretty much connecting to my body, and I had been over the last number of years, I think I was just really performing the motions. And this is where, in hindsight, where I am today, I look back and I think, just because you're a dancer doesn't mean you're embodied. There's a very, very different, big difference between being embodied and being a professional mover or dancer or weightlifter or whatever. So I was dancing every day, which is like my lifeline, but I wasn't embodied. And I ended up leaving Perth. I traveled the world. That ended up, in the fast forward version, is I ended up really getting involved in environmentalism and discovering permaculture, which is, part of the path woven in with you, and which was fantastic. But part of that entry and practice of permaculture, whilst it was beautiful and it was deeply fulfilling to be close to nature in that way and kind of come back to those roots of deep nature connection since I was a kid, and obviously, no doubt, healing in an unconscious way, I realized that I got into permaculture from this view of like, I'm going to save the world through permaculture. I'm going to become this like massive environmental activist. And I was part of Sea Shepherd for a while, and it was my whole thing. And I realized that I'd had a lot of time holding the archetype of the victim in my youth. And the way that I got out of it, not necessarily, but the way that I kind of shifted the position at least, was I just went way into my rescuer. And I was like, I'm going to rescue everybody. I'm going to rescue the world. Everything's going to be saved by permaculture. And that took me so far as it does, until I had my breakthrough moment. And it came when I put myself in some pretty intense situations. Like, I was working in natural disaster relief, seeing people's houses completely destroyed, seeing dead bodies on the road. And I realized, I think my nervous system just hit its capacity, really, if I was to have a 3,000 feet view of what was going on. And I describe it as well as the soul kind of tugging at my ankles. And I wasn't dancing at that point. I was just doing my intense permaculture work, and I collapsed. It was like the classic on the bathroom floor, tears, I don't know what's happening to me, whole world falling apart moment. And that was my first big transition point in my life, where I couldn't continue. Came back to Australia in a big heap, and the one whisper that felt true to follow was to start dancing again. And that's when I discovered more ecstatic forms of dance, let's say, or more movement or embodiment forms of dance, 5 rhythms, dance movement therapy work. And I just dived into it. And at the same time, I was kind of in that questioning, what do I do with my life now? I was, on this peak of my career, and especially for how young I was, like I was mid-20s and, earning really good money as a permaculture worker, which is very rare because permaculture is not a particularly lucrative enterprise. Maybe a bit more now, but back even a decade ago, it was still very, to make lots of money off teaching people permaculture design was rare. Yeah. And so, my career came crashing down on my own fault. I was in that place of like, what do I do with my life? And I went back to uni to do my master's because that was my like safety net, let's say, the comfort of going back into education. And I came to the point of doing a thesis in my master's, and just also at the same time of kind of figuring out what I loved to do. And I came to this question, or this fork in the road of continue my environmental work. My master's was in environment, or pursue this path of the work in somatics and dance that was absolutely changing my world and being a deeply healing ally at the time. And I kind of didn't want to give up either. I wanted to have that devotional practice to both, because both were really meaningful to me. And I've pondered, how do I bring these two together? I wondered if that's possible. And that was the master's thesis idea that I pitched. How do we bring this world of somatics and dance into environment? Do they relate? Are they supportive to one another? And what I soon very quickly discovered was that they've never been separate ever in the history of mankind. and only in the last, like little chunk of like modern Western culture. And not only did they come together, but what my PhD thesis on this same topic and my entire body of work that I do now is understanding that dance and somatics and embodiment work is actually an ecological necessity. It's not an additional thing. It's not a fun thing. It's not a creative way to do it. Dance is, and somatics and embodiment stuff. I say dance. I'd rather say things like movement or embodiment, because dance conjures up like becoming a ballet dancer, and I don't want to mean it that way. But this work in embodiment and somatics and movement is a fundamental part of what it means to be human, and a fundamental part of what it means to deeply connect to place, to the land, and find our belonging through that. And so that's what my research is in now. It's in a topic called Ecosomatics. That was the topic of my master's and now my PhD. And it's pretty amazing to be pioneering that in Australia. Like, I'm the only person doing their doctorate in this subject in Australia. A lot of my colleagues who are even talking about some of this stuff are all overseas. But ironically, we have one of the oldest living cultures in the world here in Australia as well, what we now call Australia, the First Nations peoples. And I've been blessed to have really beautiful connections and relationships long-term with some people in those communities. And whilst, at an academic level, we might not be exploring ecosomatics extensively, but it's been practiced here, probably the longest it's been practiced anywhere else. So it's a pretty great research ground to do that. And, and now I'm getting to dance with the question of, okay, as someone with European heritage who's living here on this land we could now call Australia, like what's my ecosomatic practice to be able to connect to country, to connect with place in a way that isn't appropriating, is in a way that's in deep reverence for those practices here, but is going to be supportive to me on my journey. And that's kind of where my path has taken me. And it's a very simplified version. There's been a lot of like ups and downs in that process, but if I was to identify a catalyst, it would definitely be on that big first breakthrough moment that really changed the course of where I was heading.
And this is, I had a similar thing, and I think so many humans and healers and leaders, they do have this is who I am, and then the universe just goes, yeah, no, that's not it. And
start over again.
Yeah, but I've worked so hard on being this thing, and this is who I am, and everyone knows it, and I'm respected, and yada, 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 and it all comes crashing down. And I've had this happen multiple times in my life. First was when I was sick and I used to work in Surfers Paradise and party and drink, and then I went on to that health aspect of ourselves. But then I kind of went almost too hippie, and I couldn't connect with people because I was walking around Surfers Paradise barefoot. I remember having really long hair, and I kind of looked like a homeless person. But I thought I was free, and then I decided I didn't like Surfers Paradise. I moved out into the Talabudra Valley, and it was beautiful, and I just live out there and kind of disconnect from everybody. And that's who I thought I was, where I was a hermit. And all these times where I kind of thought I knew who I was, there were certain aspects where I was really living, my truth and being embodied, but there were certain aspects I was either running away from or pretending I was somebody that I wasn't. And because I liked that part of something. And I guess what I'm seeing in society as a CHEK practitioner, which is a holistic health practitioner for those who are not have never heard of a CHEK practitioner before, or Paul Chek, is I see so many people in burnout, overwhelm, depression, anxiety, immune issues, just complete nervous. They're out there. Like, I look at everybody's nervous system and I'm like, oh, one thing, and you're gone. And the thing that I notice is it's because we are so disconnected from nature. It's like you were saying, where it's like well, wonder if nature and dance and they connect, and it's like we've just in our minds in this box have decided that we're not a part of nature almost, or at the end of our work week or our, once we retire, we'll get back to living and enjoying life. And what I've noticed is when a lot of us do reach that breaking point, there's this kind of like, what do I actually enjoy? Because when you do go from the victim to the savior, everything's, I've got to be on purpose. I've got to save the world. I can never rest. I can never just laugh. Everything's so serious and I've just got to go, 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 go. And that's like, if you look at nature, what animal, what bird, they're just lying in the sun, they're chilling, they'll do a bit throughout the day, they'll dance, they'll play. And humans, we're so out of rhythm with the way nature is. And that's why our nervous system is just such an overwhelm. So one of the questions I wanted to ask you is, how do you work with people? And do you work specifically with women? Do you work with men? Like I've shifted my business to work more with men. I used to work mainly with women. Pretty much my entire doTERRA business is built off women. But I got the message not too long ago. It's like you need to pretty much man up and start talking to men about emotions, talking to men about, manhood and growing through in this modern time. And so, I guess explain a little bit about what you do. And I do want you to go a little bit deep into the science, because one thing that I find is that somatics and healing modalities can be too far removed from people because it's a little bit too woo-woo. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like, just trust me, it works. And there is a need for people, if they choose a mentor or a guide, to have trust. But I think there's also a need for mentors and guides to actually explain what they do.
Yeah, I agree. It's all right. I actually give a little front load whenever I run programs or work with someone one-on-one. And I say there's two very prominent parts of me that is like just deeply embedded in my tacit knowledge. Tacit knowledge is like embodied knowledge, just that deep intuitive space. And then there's a total nerd part of me that like loves to pick everything apart and knows how it works. And I love to share that with people because it's a personal passion where to explain these things that we think are just magical, like all these amazing things, particularly that cultures that are very earth-centric or indigenous cultures practice. We often, in those in the West, often think, wow, they've got these magical abilities that, that are special, that are unique. And absolutely, like every culture is beautiful and special and unique. But so much of the things that are practiced are so deeply human and actually accessible to everyone. And you just have to understand the mechanics, and lots of it can be explained through the body. And so I totally nerd out on explaining that. So I love that you've asked it. And I want to also just trace back and say, gosh, what a humbling experience it is to have those life initiations, which, bring you closer into the truth of who you are. Like you were saying, you think you know who you are, and then you kind of get smashed and life reveals. I thought I was so connected to nature because I was practicing permaculture. Like I spent every day outside with my hands in the dirt, designing gardens, and I knew nothing.
Yeah.
It was like, girl, you don't know shit.
Yeah.
And same thing about dance. Like I've been a dancer my whole life, and it was like, you think you know anything about the body, or you think anything about somatics? Like check again. And so it's a deeply humbling experience, but in that, I think that's also where we develop our mastery, not in the pompous way, but in a humble way. And so to bring it back to your question, what is it that I do with people now? And so in the past, I've worked primarily with women, more so because I understand the somatic body of women through my own personal experience. So it was kind of a easy in for me. And I'm in a point of transition of actually opening it up to the wider public and making it accessible to anyone, particularly now that I'm stepping into a space where I actually want to train people in ecosomatics and have that be a modality that people can practice. Now that I've kind of got the years behind me of of working in groups and with individuals. And so for those who are new to the topic, I think it might be easy for me to introduce what ecosomatics is, and then I'll share how I practice it. So ecosomatics is a field of research and practice that emerged out of the combination of two fields. And one of those is deep ecology. So deep ecology is a field of research that came about as an attempt to kind of deepen our ecological understanding of the world. And it was originated in like the 70s, where people like Arne Nace and Rachel Carson, who wrote Silent Spring, like these people were involved in the environmental movement and saw it as quite shallow. Like it was very much about ecological efficiency and how can we use natural resources in a more effective way, and how can we produce more without, having a bigger imprint, and those are essential things. But it wasn't so much recognizing the consciousness and the animacy of the natural world in the way that Indigenous people might. And so deep ecology understands that within the living world, there is a consciousness, there's an animacy, there is a personhood to these natural beings, whether it be a river or a tree or things. And that might be a bit far-fetched even for people listening here, but if we trace back, even just a couple hundred years ago, that animacy, that idea of animism, was seeing the consciousness and the aliveness in things that we would class today as maybe inert matter. That was our normal consciousness. That was very normal. So it's only in the last little while it's not been normal. So deep ecology recognizes that and says that we as humans are not the top of the food chain. We're not the top of the hierarchy. We're part of this big ecological web. And so we're part of an integrated system, and we're connected with that always. And then it merges that with the field of somatics. Now, somatics is a body of work or field of research that understands the body is a source of knowing, a source of understanding. And it's something that has its own genius that is not in contrast or comparison with the mind, but actually can be approached from the perspective of the body-mind. And somatics as a field really came about to challenge or to deconstruct something called Cartesian dualism, which is some of the Rene Descartes, one of the earlier philosophers, I think 15th century, said, "I think, therefore I am." And as a result of that, we kind of identified ourselves as this thinking being. And this was really the catalyst as what to put us in our heads, so to speak. When we say, I'm just so in my head, I'm so in my mind, that's very much a product of this early philosophical thinking and the way that it completely shaped modern culture and the way that we do science, the way that we do education. It was really a massive catalyst for culture as we know it. And what that did was it separated the mind and body. And it said that the mind is hierarchy, it's where our identity is, and the body is kind of just this machine that carries it around. And that ran alongside this, one of the other big influences, which I focus on a lot in my research, is mythology. And in the West, we had the Judeo-Christian traditions, which talk about the Garden of Eden. And in the Garden of Eden, that mythology is all about the sin of listening to the body or following those bodily desires. When, the first humans attempted to eat from the tree of knowledge and seduced by the serpent, which is, interestingly, in Indigenous cultures, a sign of life force energy, the feminine goddess, the body, is tempted, and they eat from this tree of knowledge and fall from grace and are therefore shamed. And so there was this, that's the book in the book of Genesis, which is the creation story. So that at a psychological level said, well, we must resist the body's sensations, temptations. We must, any form of sensuality or bodily experience is sin, and we must have the control or the mental capacity to override that. So these two influences of Cartesian dualism and the Garden of Eden myth really led to this separation of mind and body. And so somatics emerged as a field that says, wait a second, the body is actually its own form of intelligence. there's wisdom here. There's a way of orienting our life from here. And the most simplest example of that, which everyone has experienced, is just gut instinct. You're like, oh, something feels fishy. Like your mind hasn't picked that up. You're just like, something feels wrong and I can't really explain it. That's the body wisdom. And now all of this work has come out around using somatics for trauma healing, for dance movement therapy. It's kind of like the hit word now to everyone to do somatics and get in their body. But that's kind of where it emerged from, is to really come back into that essence of wholeness, which is the body mind, or the merging of all parts of ourselves. And ecosomatics as a field then says that, okay, so we have this area over here that we're interconnected with nature, and nature is conscious, and the body is a source of knowing, a source of orienting ourselves in the world. Well, then if we bring these together, Ecosomatics says that the way in which we understand our interconnectedness with all beings, and we actually recognize and feel and practice that relationship to the conscious animate world, is through the body. And we've done that forever. Ecosomatics is a fancy term that is applied to something that we have done forever, which is dance, song, ceremony, all these embodied ways of connecting that bring us into what I describe as like a felt connection to the natural world. Because connection is not conceptual. Connection is not an idea. You cannot think your way into connection, just like you can't think your way into riding a bike or surfing a wave. Connection is a felt experience. It's something that you embody, and therefore that develops this somatic connection to you and the thing that you're like related to. And at a scientific level, there's all sorts of neurochemistry that happens, hormonal things that happen in that process, which actually create true bonding. We see this with mothers and their babies, like all of when mothers are breastfeeding their babies, the release of oxytocin and all those love hormones is part of the bonding process. It's why mothers feel so connected to their children, because they've got an entire embodied process that's facilitating that. You can't just look at your baby and be like, I just feel so connected to you. Like it's touching them and smelling them and be like, oh my gosh. So that's the kind of background of Ecosomatics. And then how I apply that is I've been running deep nature immersion probably the last 7 years, and really focusing on rewilding as part of that for probably the last 6. And for me, that's been like integrating survival skills like fire by friction, shelter building, as well as all of the embodiment work, putting mud on the skin and things like that. And I've integrated those survival skills. Like I learned them and I just found them so transformative, but not in the sense of like, we got to battle against nature, let's use these tools to survive out there. And I very much took them on through the lens of ecosomatics, of relating when I'm making fire and teaching people how to make fire, is that like really being attentive to the practice of, rubbing the hands together and the smell of the smoke, and, what are you noticing in your own like agitation in your body or excitement, and listening to the particular sound. And, fire in particular is an incredibly sensual process. I've traditionally taught women how to make fire, and men have the brute strength to just like go ahead and just like go for it to make fire. But women have the capacity to be fire masters, because it's actually a deeply sensual process, and women can become really sensitive to all the different little sensations in there, and create magic where they would never be able to, like in logical terms, you'd think, well, they can't create fire. So I wove in those skills with my work in ecosomatics, whether it be dance, movement practices, lots of nervous system work, as I've discovered, do a lot of nervous system work, and through that created something called, just through a lot of this practice and trial and error and my own personal journey, have created something called the Earth Framework out of that. And the Earth Framework is an acronym, and it's so each letter has a different meaning in that process. And what I've come to discover is the Earth Framework is this kind of map. It's this map back into embodied connection to the land. And as a kind of byproduct of that, it's been a pathway into soul, which I didn't actually lean into that expecting. But what I have come to learn is that the place which we meet our soul, which, you know, at a really interesting level, when you zoom back and you think of all these themes that I've spoken about, like the Garden of Eden myth and the serpent representing, you know, the feminine, the goddess, the underworld, like all these things, all these symbols of soul are the exact same symbols that we have for the body and for nature. And so it's kind of obvious when I really got into it that when I start working really deeply with the body and start deeply connecting to the natural world, it's almost like the soul bubbles up quite naturally out of that. And so that's really where, that's another kind of layer of my work that I do. And despite it sounding, lots of it sounding, oh yeah, you're just rubbing sticks together, like dancing out in the water. Like, what I love about the Earth framework is it puts in the science in there. Like we have a whole section on the A in the Earth framework stands for allies, and it's all about the science of the nervous system. And, you know, we talk about this woo-woo concept of being able to hear the voice of nature, or being able to, you know, psychically feel where animals are. And I'm like, I can explain to you how that exactly works. That's actually a function of your nervous system. It's your capacity to pick up on energetic waves in the environment. And, you know, this is something that your ancestors have done a really long time. And so it's kind of cool for me to explain these far-fetched concepts or these, you know, beliefs that things are woo-woo, and go, oh no, we can actually explain how that happens. Similar in the way that I think, you know, monks in Tibet have been meditating for millennia, and then science over the last couple of decades has come around and be like, oh yeah, what they're actually doing is legit. They're actually accessing these theta and gamma brainwaves and all this kind of stuff, and they've now been able to understand how that's happening at a biological level. So that's what I do with the Earth framework, is that I take them through these very embodied processes so they get the intuitive, grounded part, and then I actually tell them exactly from a scientific perspective what was actually occurring. And sometimes I do that on the flipped way as well. So it brings all of us on board, you know, it brings that embodied part of us that's like, yeah, I fully just feel it and I trust it and this feels true. And it also accommodates the skeptic or the mind that's like, yeah, what's actually happening here? Is this just like a bullshit idea?
And the healthy skepticism, I think, is really important.
Yeah.
Because there is a lot of bullshit around. Yeah. And there's a lot of people that have theories and have ideas and think that they're saying things, but they're not actually practicing. You can a lot of the time you can physically look at somebody's body and go, yeah, you're talking rubbish, mate. And there is a lot of these people around. Right. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to get you on the podcast, is that I like to interview people that are intelligent, but also practicing their intelligence, and they're living that, and they're not just a pie in the sky type idea. And the other thing, what you were talking about, is with the Buddhists and indigenous cultures and all these practices that have been going on for as long as we can remember. It's just that modern science hasn't caught up. A lot of these practices are deeply scientific, and the practices are so well thought out and in their nervous system because it's been generationally passed on, and science just doesn't understand it. And it's one of those things that, like, microscopes aren't that new. Yeah. And before that, people didn't know, and now they can see through a microscope and go, oh wow, there's life there. And before that, we didn't know. And so science just slowly catches up, and sometimes people think of these things as miracles and magic or mysticism. But if you took someone from 100 years and plunked them today, and I said, look, I'm going to talk to somebody that's in a completely different space live, and there's going to be an image, they would think that's magic.
Yeah.
Absolutely blow their mind. How is this impossible? And it's like, well, we're just tapping into the waves of life force, and that, you know, we're communicating. And I think sometimes people forget in this modern world, because it is so disconnected from nature. It's like we have created a world, and it's kind of like we just, oh yeah, other nature's great and that, but you know, this is the real world. And that, what people think is the real world, and I kind of consider the nonsense world, the fake world, is what's causing people to be so sick, and miserable. And it's because, like, specifically, like, if you look at women, a lot of women have completely lost their femininity. They're in this corporate structure. They're, you know, like you're at your peak of your career, and you're like, yeah, I'm crushing goals, and then your body's like, yeah, no.
Yeah, no.
Yeah. and men, we're kind of like, what's our place anymore? And a lot of it does come back to, you know, you kind of see these corporate wellness retreats where everyone goes out and gets well because they actually have a bit of fun and play and you know, relax a little bit. But the challenge with that is that's done as kind of, it's not a gimmick, but it's done as it's once a year we'll have a little time where we connect again, or once every couple of years, and it's not done monthly, daily, weekly. It's not done in cycles. It's just completely like a separate thing. And I guess, how do you see we bring it back together? Like, obviously it's an individual choice, and what I'm seeing is nature, Mother Nature, whatever you want to call it, is kind of like, all right, humans, enough's enough. And it's kind of, we're being almost forced into this transition because we are so disconnected. And if we don't reconnect with who we are, we won't be here anymore.
Yeah.
And I'm seeing this happen where people are just in, like, their nervous system is in fight or flight. It's been in fight or flight for decades. And the things that they used to numb, which is the typical working more, watching every TV show, alcohol, drugs, sex, porn, sport, all the things that used to fill them up with a little bit of joy so they could escape that nervous system, don't work anymore. And now people are kind of like, holy shit, what do I do?
Yeah. And I have a lot of compassion for people in that sense, like, because this way of life, this lifestyle that we have in this kind of modern disconnected lifestyle, even just living in houses and other things, is relatively new on the spectrum of the human experience. And so our whole biology, our brain is not designed to live in this way. And we, you know, our entire biology developed in complete saturation with the natural world. And so going out in nature, you know, drinking wild water and harvesting food from the land, like, it wasn't even something that required effort or additional thought. It was just how it was. And so I do feel for people in that it's not as accessible. Like, you have to actually make an effort. Like, you can't, it's, you know, the water that comes out of your tap, it's just trash. And, like, you know, if you, in terms of affordable housing, people, like, don't have a backyard, and a lot of the time. And so I want to also take, like, yes, it is an individual choice, but I also want to understand that, or people to understand that it's such a systemic, structural thing.
Oh, it's done on purpose.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, because a disconnected species is easily to control.
Oh, very.
Yeah.
Well, a disembodied, I'll give everybody, like, a disconnected and also disembodied, like, is very easy to control. When you're not in relation, when you're completely identified with your mind, you're very easily controlled, because you're disconnected from that gut instinct, from that somatic knowing.
Yeah.
And, you know, you're disconnected from that larger guidance of the natural world. And this is where, like, I see almost caught in this loop of isolation, because, like, yes, we have the system designed that's isolating people. That's also, like, amplified by the fact that the way that we overcome isolation is from being saturated in the natural world. And because this is where your identity starts to melt away, and you recognize that you're not just some individual operator having to navigate all of this stuff alone. There's actually a whole ecological web out there of support. And that might sound a bit woo-woo, but there's actually, this is a fundamental science of what it means to be human. And that isn't to say, I wanted to comment on what you were sharing, where Indigenous cultures and some of these ancient traditional practitioners have been doing this stuff for thousands and thousands of years. It's not that science is suddenly validating or proving it's right. It's just a helpful way that as a group of people that come from a very different frame of mind, it's helpful to have that. It's like talking the same language.
Yeah.
And so that lens of science makes it accessible to some people who would have kind of cast it aside as just, invalid.
Yeah.
So I want to say that. But yeah, at a systemic level, it's so much more difficult. I have a lot of compassion for people. But I also want to reframe it and say it's actually this idea of reconnecting to nature is actually so much more innate than the idea of having to overhaul your entire life. Because everyone thinks, if I want to be connected to nature, if I want to connect to my body, then I have to overhaul my entire life. I can't work my corporate job that I'm using to support my family and blah, 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 blah. One of the easiest ways that you can connect to the natural world is through a relationship to light. That's one of the, simplest ways. You don't have to have a backyard. You don't have to have access to big wide open spaces or go to the beach at 5 o'clock in the morning and swim laps or whatever it is that you think that you have to do. It's all around you, and absolutely everything in your house, everything that you own, every single part of your entire life is created from nature. It's just nature in a different form. I kind of almost just you think of a plastic bottle and everyone's like, I hate plastic and I hate all these things. And I've read these amazing papers and artworks by people saying, plastic's just kind of like human. It's been taken out of its natural environment. It's been shape-shifted and melted down into this weird amalgamation of something. And now it's demonized and made wrong. And it's like, really, that's just kind of like what humans have gone through. We've been taken out of our natural environment. We've been shape-shifted, made to work a 9-to-5 job and wear suits. And it's like, no wonder we feel like fucking plastic sometimes.
Yeah. And 9 to 5 is actually that's someone really living the dream. Most people are 7 or 7.
Totally. Yeah.
And it is something that I agree. I see it so much where it's like people think that they have to, all right, I've got to do something extreme.
Yeah. Because
I'm here. And it's like, well, you don't actually need to do it because that's the same thing. It's doing something. It's like I'm already at my capacity of doing. I've got to do something else to then get to that next level where it's coming back into that being and understanding that you are even if you think you're disconnected, your mind thinks you're disconnected from nature. You're not. You just think you are. You are nature, and it is coming back into understanding. It's almost like an understanding first and that awareness. And then it's almost, when something like you buy a new car and you and then you see that car everywhere. You've never seen that car ever when you're driving. And then you see it everywhere.
Yeah, the red car effect.
Yeah. It's the same thing. It's like you have this awareness that I'm part of nature or I'm more embodied. And then it starts to kind of unravel because it's into your awareness field.
Sorry, you go.
There you go.
I was going to say this is why the work that I do in the nervous system so early on, when I work with people in groups or one-on-one, is so fundamental. Yes, of course, working with your nervous system and having a relaxed nervous system, that's kind of like the trend. But what I share is the reason why we have a receptive nervous system is so we can become more present to our own belonging. And when we have this fight or flight nervous system, we're in beta brainwave state. That's the going on, strategizing, thinking, planning. And when we're in that particular nervous system state at an energetic level, and this has all been measured in science, your energetic field completely closes off. Because when you're in beta, you're on the go, you're doing the things, you're in tunnel vision. And if you compound that with that fight or flight, because at the same time, it's also triggering that the sympathetic nervous system responses, which is fight or flight, you're pumping hormones that are saying, I need to work through this. I need to get, I could potentially be in danger. And if you think of that, a situation like that in your life, you're not going to be suddenly have this open, receptive nervous system, feeling your connection to things. Like, no, you're very internal. You're like internal in the way that you are, not internal in the kind of positive way, but in the way that you're closed off, you're not open, you're not receptive. You're very focused on your personal experience, very identified with self. And what happens in that state is that we go about our lives and we completely forget that we're ecological beings. And that's where we feel incredibly isolated. We get into adrenal burnout because we don't know how to get out of that state. And it's a self-perpetuating loop, because the more that we stay there, the more isolated that we feel. The more isolated we feel, the more disconnected. The more disconnected we feel, the more depressed we feel, and it just goes round and round. Whereas learning really, really simple ways on a daily basis, and to be able to open our nervous system back up, and that's really where it starts, is to open our receptivity, drop back into those parasympathetic states. Like, I want to also say that I don't demonize beta. I don't demonize those fight or flight states. They're very natural, very organic. It's just that we spend 90% of our time there in modern Western culture, and the impact of that is very obvious. Whereas we're only meant to spend about 5% there. You know, it's utilized for a purpose, and it's necessary. You know, if somebody's coming to attack you, genuinely, you want those nervous system responses to be really ready to go. And that's actually a critical part of getting out of freeze, which is a lot of the women that I particularly work with are in freeze states. They actually think that freeze is a matter of that it's one of those primary fight or flight. It's not. So fight or flight is the immediate sympathetic nervous system responses. That's the immediate survival response. And when they aren't accessible, or when they are overworked, or when they are not appropriate, your body just goes into freeze, into collapse. And you can think of like an animal just playing dead. That's kind of what happens. And so, ironically, being able to access those beta states is helpful for getting out of freeze. Not something that I'm against. But if in terms of where we're meant to spend 90% of our time is in states like alpha brainwave states, which is when it's that state where you reach in meditation, where you're de-identified with self, where people often have it after an orgasmic experience, like a positive sexual experience, where you feel that kind of melting experience, or a forest walk in nature, where you just feel calm, open, lucid, receptive. And science tells us that this is the state that we are most open to learning. This is the state where kids learn the most, because like when they play, for example, they're in alpha, and so they learn the most. And that's where we're meant to spend most of our time. And so a lot of the work that I do, you know, when I say connecting people to nature or getting them to hear the voice of nature, it's really at a nervous system level. And that's kind of where I get really nerdy too, because the things that we can do in these deeper and deeper brainwave states, that's been measured and explainable by science, really actually gives language, or gives a whole different frame to understanding how miracles occur, how magic occurs. You know, one of the classic ones is, you know, hearing the voice of nature, or being able to feel like ancient trackers used alpha brainwave states when they would look for animals in the wild. And I've had experiences with First Nations communities where I've gone up to, out on country, and they say, "Oh, over there, there's a bird over there," and you can't see it, like nobody can see it. And they're like, "What do you mean?" And then suddenly the bird flies out, and they're like, "Oh yeah, that's my friend." And everyone's like, "Oh my God, how did you do that? It's magic." And I do think, of course, it's special and beautiful. But now I understand that no, that person actually just had a deeply receptive nervous system, and they were able to pick up on the concentric rings of energy that move through space in the same way that I've talked about this. I teach this in my work, where if you drop a pebble in water, it creates those concentric rings of energy that move out of the impact. And the same thing happens through air. If there's some kind of event that happens in space, those concentric rings of energy move through air. And when when we have a receptive, open nervous system, when we're in that alpha state, we have the capacity to pick that up. And we're picking it up all the time anyway. We just don't realize it. But that's how we're able to go, this is, there's an animal over there, or this is how we can kind of feel our connection. And that's completely explainable, and it all comes down to this nervous system work. And, the things that we think are quite magical, like talking to nature, feeling our belonging and all of that, it's really an awareness shift. Like you said, we're actually always connected. It's just whether we have the nervous system state or not to be able to pick up on it.
Yeah, it's really interesting because it took me a while to realize that not everybody had that. Well, not everybody was connected to that, because that's, for a lot of my life, I've been like that. So I just thought everybody could just kind of, connect with nature and do these things. And it was a real surprise to me over the years to figure out, wow, there is a disconnection for a lot of people. And if we look at, it's funny that you talked about kids learn through playing. And then if we look at the education system, where it's like, sit in a classroom and learn from the most boring, monotone type, in a form like reading, which a lot of people it's not the best way for them to learn. And this is how we're going to raise the next generation. And the fact that it's scientifically so outdated, but it's still being done in that way, shows me that is a systematic design to keep us small. Because and that's why there's a big movement in homeschooling and Steiner school systems and things like this, because we're watching geniuses come in as a genius and kind of come out as a robot.
Yeah.
And it's quite fascinating that it fascinates me that people aren't talking about this more, because it's not like it's a new concept. It's, as you said, scientifically proven, and it's been around. We've got this knowledge and we've got this understanding. Even the fact that we know that we use a very, very small percentage of even our brain, let alone the rest of our body. We're using this. We've got so much wisdom and knowledge in here. We're tapping into this. It's almost like we've boxed off our whole body and just kind of be like, we'll just use this part and the rest of it just go on automatic pilot and hope for the best. So do you have any, concept or ideas about, like, I can see the way the world's going and I can feel the way the world's going. It's kind of like everything that's not serving us is kind of collapsing in front of our eyes. And a lot of people are a bit terrified by this or worried about this, whereas I'm kind of like, yes, come on, let's get back to it. Let's get back on the path because we have lost. We've never lost because it's always there, but it's almost like we've delayed the best part of ourselves. And now we've come to this like evolutionary point where it's quite exciting to be here, because we're watching the biggest show on earth ever. And we're watching almost the dismantling and destruction of the old world coming back into the new world. And it's a mixture of the old world and the new world, and everything's kind of just like, and it's like this big washing machine.
Great TV series, isn't it?
Oh, it's great. Like, you could just imagine there's probably beings just watching this go, let's tune into Earth today. What are they going to do? Yeah. Are they going to make it, or are they going to not make it? I don't know. It's probably polls going and like different voting. I reckon they're going to make it. I don't reckon they are. And, we might, but at the same time, Earth will always be here and spirit will always be here. And, but yeah, there is so much changing, and like, I am so excited by it, but I'm also quite intrigued that a lot of people still don't notice it happening. It's like they're trying to hold on to this old world of safety, maybe it is, because maybe their nervous system can't handle releasing. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I have a lot to say about it. There's lots. I also wanted to say, just to capture what you were mentioning about the education system, I can't recall the exact numbers of the study, so whoever's listening, I encourage you to go and look it up. But I remember NASA actually did a scientific experiments once where they wanted to understand the proportion of society that is actually geniuses for the sake of, coming up with these incredibly inventive technologies and things like that. Like, what makes a genius, how many actually people are geniuses. And what they found is children, before they actually entered into that school age, there was 95% of us were geniuses, like we're classed as genius. And then by the time they went through their schooling, and I think they reached adolescence or something, have a stab at how much you think, what percentage?
I reckon it'd definitely be less than 5, but like
2%.
Yeah.
2% were the remaining geniuses, and that was a pure product of the education system, where it completely stifled that creative genius that is innate to all human beings. We talk about these incredibly special people, and turns out that 95% of us, maybe even higher, if I can recall the study correctly, have that capacity.
It's like the healthcare system. Paul Chek talks about it all the time. It's like we've succeeded so far in modern medicine that almost everybody's now sick. Like, we've lost the geniuses. We've made everyone sick. We're doing well.
Yeah. But so I have a maybe a different perspective on this. Is I take a few different perspectives, and I think probably the most important thing that we could do in this time of humanity that feels like an exciting roller coaster ride to be on, and what a time in history, is to be able to hold paradox, is to be able to hold many different truths at the same time. And one of those stances that I hold is understanding that everything that we're seeing externally to us is an expression of what's happening internally. There's that belief that we are nature. Well, then, okay, everything's happening as a mirror reflection of me. And when I think about, the intense things that are happening on our planet right now, whether it be social or environmental, cultural, legal, political, all sorts of things, is I think about that level of separation and polarization and demonization that we see, in all these wars and all these, health issues and things. That's the exact same battle that's happening internally, and it's very easy to make an other of somebody, whether it be someone from a different religion or someone from a different cultural background or someone with a different political opinion or medical choice than I. And the harder thing to do is to recognize that they are just part of your internal ecology too. We all have these massive parts, and it's a whole area of my work which I'm really interested in exploring further post-PhD, is this idea of integrating our whole ecology. Because I think one of the fundamental reasons why we're in this complete state of chaos is because we are so disintegrated in our personal lives, in our personal body, and I'll use the mind-body example. Without realizing it, we have a culture that has completely demonized sensuality, being in the body, having a body, navigating our life through the body, and things are changing, for sure, depending on your circles and depending on where you're, the kind of things that you do and listen to. But that level of internal war between overriding the mind and the body, it's just what we see externally. And I think, so at the same time, I think the symptoms that we're seeing outside of us are very same we should treat them in the same way that we would treat symptoms in our own body, of recognizing that actually, symptoms aren't a root cause. That we need to look deeper at what's the root cause. They're just the thing that gets our attention. They're the flags waving, being like, "Hey, over here, I think you need to pay attention."
Yeah, it's like the headache is not a lack of Panadol in the body.
Yeah, that's it.
And we go for this simple solutions type thing to get that quick fix a lot of the time, and that's a lot of how our society is built. It's just grab this, grab that to try to fix things without the questioning of like, why did this even occur? You drive your car to the mechanic and there's no oil there, and your motor's blown up. And how did it happen? It's like, well, you didn't put any oil in your car, and that's what happens when you drive your car with no oil. And a lot of us are where these beautiful, the most advanced technology is the human body, and we aren't treating it like that. And yeah, so continue on what you're saying.
Yeah. So there's that factor. And the other is this strange paradox that I kind of, like, my human self doesn't wish it was this case, but understands that it often requires chaos. It often requires a massive death process. It often requires a trip to the underworld to have the transformation required. I've experienced that over and over in my life, and I've supported, hundreds of people through that process, of that kind of death rebirth process. And what I've come to learn is that, let's say, for example, you get really, really sick. That's often the catalyst for you to get really well, because you hit that rock bottom. And ironically, this is the weird thing, is that our soul came here to experience all of it.
Oh, yeah. Loves it.
Yeah, totally loves it. Our ego is like, but I just want the good thing. I just want everyone to be healthy and happy, and I want everything to be peaceful. And that there's nothing wrong with that. Like the human part of me, of course, wants those things. But the bigness of me, the cosmic me, the soul version of me, which is more concerned with isness and experience, is up for all of it. It wants the full gamut.
Yeah, well, it wants to watch you be the tyrant and the hero and everything in between, and it's sitting there going, yes,
yeah, exactly,
rock bottom, how exciting,
exactly.
And that was, for me, that was when I look back at the pneumonia and the glandular fever that I had when I was so sick. In that experience, yeah, worst thing ever. Now, thank God that happened to me, because it completely changed who I am. Well, not changed who I am, got me to be more aware of who I am, but also it gives me a deep level of compassion when I see others going through that. I'm like, oh yeah, that bit sucked. That bit was really difficult, and I'm rooting for you because I know how challenging that part is. And we it's kind of like the universe. It's just this cosmic joke. It's constantly just testing. I honestly think it's just testing your sense of humor. Can you laugh at this? Can you laugh at how much you fucked up? You never thought you could get there, but you did. Good, first prize. And that's one of the things that I've noticed in myself is I constantly go back to laughter. I constantly come back to this sense of awe and amazement of kind of everything, even if it's negative.
Yeah,
I'm like, wow, that is like next level crazy. That's like that I didn't pick that one. My mind, my ego, who thought it knew everything, was like, yeah, that one got me.
Well, I treat it like a game now. It's kind of helpful to see it that way. Is when things that are really challenging happen, of course I have my natural ego moment that wants to be victimized, and I give permission for that part of myself. You're the part that's like, this sucks, why is it always happening to me?
Yeah.
Blah, blah, blah. And then once I'm able to actually just be in approval for that part, and give it its time without identifying with it. Like, that's the key, is that being able to kind of witness myself in being in it.
Nothing like witnessing yourself being in a big old tantrum, is there?
That's it. And then I see it as a game of like, oh, okay. There's an amazing quote by a woman called Carolyn Lovewell. She wrote a book called Existential Kink, and she talks about having is evidence of wanting. And of course, our ego doesn't want these experiences, but the fact that you have it in your life, and the fact that you're a very creative being, tells me that there's some part of you that wanted this. Well, then what's that part that wanted this? And she references Carl Jung's work a lot. And I use his work a lot in my research as well. And he talks a lot about the unconscious is the thing that creates most of our life. And what is the unconscious? It's part of actually our soul.
Mm.
It's the non-ego self. And that part of us wants everything. It wants every flavor of ice cream. And, that the fact that, ironically, if we just had this perfect little life where everything was going fine and we lived kind of in a Stepford Wives kind of reality, like Barbie world or something, we would be bored out of our...
Oh, we'd be bored as fuck.
We'd hate it. We'd like, and what's the purpose of existing? What is the purpose of coming here? And of course the ego would want that. But like, the reason why we're so obsessed with movies and stories, and before we had Netflix, we were sitting around a fire listening to mythologies and these ancient tales of these grand adventures, is because we're hungry for the up and down. We're hungry for the adventure. We're hungry for that mythological path of defeat and triumph and facing the dragons. It's like literally why we came to Earth, like why we chose to be in a body. And so when those things happen, I let myself have my little tantrum, and then I take that game perspective. I'm like, oh, can I let myself not just be in approval of this shitty situation, but fully play it out, like completely play it out, so I don't have to come back to in another life and get this part that I wasn't willing to experience, or I don't have to do it again in this lifetime. Because I'm like, oh yeah, got that bit, because I find if I'm resisting an experience that clearly my unconscious really wants to have, unless I can bring that conscious and go, all right, I'm going to let you have this completely, it's going to be hungry for it for the rest of your life. And we all have that experience of something chasing us, like, damn it, this has happened again.
Relationships, money, people have this, so it's just like, yeah, I did it again. And the thing I like to look at is when we have, we go into that pity party, and I'm down for a pity party. Like I'll have one for myself, and I think it's actually quite important to feel, what, this actually feels really shit, and I was hard done by and poor me and all that type of stuff. And it is great to be in that. But then when you realize, oh, wow, I created this, it's actually really powerful, because if you created this, you can now create this. But if you stay, and this is where, like, I work with a lot of people as a check practitioner, is when they stay in that victimhood, they've released their creative power. And they're kind of saying, well, the world did this to me. When you have to look at it and go, oh, damn. It's like, remember, like Scooby-Doo, where they used to take the mask off? Have you ever seen that cartoon where it's like, who did it? And it's himself. It's like, damn it. And we are. And when we realize that we created this experience, no matter how traumatic it was, and, there's a lot of experiences where people say, well, why would somebody create getting raped or some, well, and things like these really deep traumatic deaths, things like that. And it's like, it's not that the ego it's the soul at some level needed that lesson, wanted that lesson, and it was an experience that they could then help potentially others. And it is really hard, because like I see a lot of people say, but that's so that person had that happen to them, and you're like, yeah, I know that's really fucked up.
Mm-hmm.
But if that person stays in that victim mode, then they can never, that whatever happened to them then won.
Mm.
Whereas if they can shift out of that and go into on a level, and it is really hard, because I understand this traumatic
paradox, it's tricky.
Yeah, the traumatic things that I've happened to me, I was like, no, I'm the victim. That's it. Like, I don't deserve this. And a lot of the time you don't.
Mm.
But as soon as you claim back that you are the creator and you can now create a different story, and you won't let that old story hold power over you, even if it was the worst thing ever, that's when you really step into, it's almost like you step back into your God essence.
Well, that's when you land the divine in the body.
Yeah.
Because you can hold that paradox, which is, I can hold the human part of me that's, in this lifetime, in this body, that's identified as who I am, and that says, yeah, that was really shit, and I would never want someone to experience that as well. Like, I'm not going to walk around being like, well, you invited rape to happen to you. Like,
yeah, exactly.
Like, that's a shitty thing to go through. And, having gone through traumatic experiences, I can very confidently stand in the truth of that, of saying I was a victim in that situation.
Yeah.
And I can hold the paradox of the fact that my soul also asked for it.
Yeah.
Or desired to have an experience. And that's particularly the experience that I chose to have, and the lessons that I chose to gain, and how that added to my life this particular lifetime, this particular time around. And being able to hold those two things is a real big gift, because again, you're walking that balance of like, yes, I'm not just bypassing by being like, oh, this is meant to happen to me. You're seeing the big picture, but you're also able to very much hold the human experience of it. And as a practical support for that, something that I do a lot in my work with somatics is I get people to play out the character, like, with their body to complete the story. And it enables you to actually get the bigger picture of it. And what that looks like, for example, is like the part of me that wants to feel victimized in a situation, instead of being like, oh, I feel really victimized and kind of internally collapsing, and ultimately like it makes you collapse and kind of self-implode, is, can I tromp around my house, actually get my body involved and sway my hands up, or whatever it is that my body naturally wants to do? Can I turn the volume up on that character inside of me and the experience of this character and it's like, I'm the victim, and actually say it out loud. The world is against me and I hate this place.
Captain Victim.
Yeah, totally.
Put a cape on and everything.
Exactly. Because ultimately you're only playing it out like 30%, because there's a part of you like, I shouldn't be in victim, but I really do feel in victim. And it's like, nah. Let yourself have it. Yeah. And this is something that Indigenous cultures, Earth-centric cultures, including our own, did forever, had ritual containers where they got to express the full ecology of self. This is also ecosomatics, the capacity to express the full ecology of self without shame, without holding back, and ultimately it ends up in integration. Because when I give a full ritualistic expression to that part of myself, I naturally get to the point and I kind of come back into equilibrium and go, well, that was a bit silly, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And I can go, geez, I created that, and have a laugh at myself. And what a gift that is, but I wouldn't be able to get there until I fully let it rip and let myself have it. And that's what it is to be integrated. That's what it means to have that full ecological self online, and to really be nature. If we are going to talk about ourselves as nature's not like, oh, I feel a storm coming on, but I'm just going to pretend that there's not a storm and I'll just turn the volume down. No, nature's like, I'm bringing a thunder, I feel lightning. Yeah. Sun comes out naturally after that when it's ready to pass.
It's funny, I've had a client in the past that comes to mind, and he had all these health issues. He'd been in the army, so he'd kind of been told what to do his whole life. Yeah. And then he was no longer in the army, and he just didn't know. I was like, well, what do you want to do? He's like, well, I want to learn surfing. And it's like, but my grandma is saying that I should do this. And I was like, okay, is your grandma happy? And she's like, no, she's miserable. I was like, so why would you take advice from someone that's miserable? And so he learnt surfing, and then the fast forward is he ended up going to university, starting a surfing group, and started this kind of big movement in his local area just because he listened to and played out what he wanted to do. So it can be done in the when you're in that trauma and you want to really do that as well. But it's also playing out, listening to your heart and actually owning, what do I want to do? And it's so hard in the logical mind. It's like, my career's at my peak, or I'm doing this. And it's like, but I really, really, it's like, for me, I was like, I wanted to buy goats. It's like, now I've got 40 goats. And so, but it's like, it started as like this, I couldn't resist listening to it. It was like, goats, 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 goat. And then it's expanded into being more of who I am, because now I've learned about raw goat's milk, and just being with the goats has helped my mental health. And it's expanded on so many things and made me laugh and made me get frustrated because I want them to do this, and they're just looking at me like, no, we've made it out of the fence. That's your problem. You should have shut the fence properly. Now we're going to eat over here. And there's 40 of us and you can't stop us. And things like that, where you get to experience following, or I don't like saying the word chasing your dreams, but fully embodying the shit, the great, the everything in between. And then you don't have those residual parts that are stuck in the, what if, or and I see a lot of it with people who it's like with a trauma, they want to forgive before they've actually sat in it and really consoled with themselves, and they want to move to forgive too quick, or I've got to move on from this. And it's like, take your time, be in it. Eat that entire tub of ice cream if you want. Just sit there and cry for whatever. Experience it, because then it's done.
Yeah.
And then it's complete. And then we don't have to start watching, shitty remake movies of once classics, and now it's like the watered down version. You're like, oh God, like, why are we watching this?
Yeah. That's it. Like, let yourself have it, and it comes into completion. And that's like a really natural part of it. And something that I wanted to bring back to, like, when we talked about, when NASA did that study of geniuses, and we found that all those kids were actually geniuses, it's because all those kids were playing all the time. Those kids were exploring and falling on their face and getting up and getting creative, and they were in that complete zone of play. And then when put into school and kind of put in this framework of these are the credentials for success, this is the thing that you're aiming for, the trajectory in life is like up and to the right. And when we get popped out of that, and no wonder we're kind of like, everything gets so serious. We have to know our purpose. We have to make the right career decisions. Once we find that thing, you have to stay in it and become the best at it. Yeah. And I've had many experiences now where, I've gone to the peak thing, and then I kind of crumbled down. I'm like, oh wait, that wasn't my thing. Oh, what about this? And then I actually have complete acceptance of the fact that in 10 years' time, maybe even in 5 years' time, or even in 2, I might have an experience that completely reshapes what I do. I've already actually been having little inklings. What that might mean? I'm like, okay, but can I take this perspective of play? And it's like, as an adult, we lose that frame of mind, and we think, I have to get to this thing and stick to it and meet all these markers of success. But what if life was just to be able to play? Today, I want to be a goat farmer. Let's do that for a couple of years. Actually, I'm a bit over that. I'm a bit over that now. Let's try and let's go and be a hobby guitarist, or I don't know, whatever.
I've got my guitar hanging out right there, looking at it.
That idea of just being able to fumble, like the evolutionary fumble, to get our experiences. And for me, that's what makes a well life, like a really rich, integrated, playful life. Like, yeah, you might be here destined to make millions by following one particular path, and that's not a bad thing either. But that hasn't been my experience, and not in the sense of like scarcity, but I know that my soul was particularly here to enjoy all of it, like the diversity of life experiences. Like my soul just really loves to party.
Yeah, and my soul just didn't read the fine print and just was like, yeah, let's get down there. It's like, are you sure? Here's your mission. Like, yeah, sure. Let's just get me there. And I also wanted to chat on when you talked about like millionaires and money and things like that. And one of the biggest things that I notice is it's fulfillment. That's what we're really wanting. And you can be fulfilled and have lots of money, and you can be fulfilled and have no money. And you can, what I notice though is the people that actually follow their path and go, right, well, I'm supposed to be going here, but I'm being called here. You know what? I'm going to take this detour. They actually end up being more successful on a holistic level. Their health's better, their relationships are better, their finances are better, everything, their fulfillment for life, everything works. Whereas those just take that straight line and they might get successful financially, but then they drop dead of a heart attack, or their relationships break down, or they have an accident. Something happens to then divert them onto the correct path. And it's what's the saying? The feather, the car,
like
the truck. Yeah. So I missed the Mack truck. Yeah, I missed the Mack truck, and then I get hit by the bloody plane. And, yeah, the asteroid. Like I'm the type of person that sometimes misses a lot of those cues, but I'm also someone that a lot of them I do catch, and the sensitivity that I've grown in my body. I'm really proud of myself, and also excited that I do listen to that. And it's such a fulfilling experience when you listen to that, because life it's this sense of awe, this I wonder. And that's something one of my friends that has kids, and the kid will always ask questions like, Mummy, what's this? And she says, I wonder. And then so the kid gets to, instead of answering. And that's what I like about life is when I have these experiences happen to me, I say, well, that's interesting. Instead of that's bad, I wish this happened, as that's interesting. I've created this exact same thing 55 times in my life. That's interesting. Am I going to continue this, or am I going to do it a different way? And, this whole coming back into our body and owning our body and owning our environment and realizing who we are. And I truly believe that everyone that's still on this earth today, like we have the front row tickets to the most exciting show ever. And a lot of us don't realize that. And when you do realize how many souls tried to be here at this exact time, and we got here, I'm like, they sent me. I laugh at that, because I'm like, well, I'm here for a reason. And I feel like if people have a bit more reason and that fulfillment, and sometimes that reason is just to laugh more. And I look at everybody that's healthy, they have this very childlike sense of humor, where they find everything quite funny. Like I laugh at things, I'm like, oh, I should not be laughing at that. But it is deeply funny in my soul, and I know it's not politically correct or whatever it is. But there is, if we still have this life force, this cheek, this pizzazz, and I think a lot of people are realizing that they've kind of sacrificed that little bit for what the school system told them to do, or what their parents told them to do, and it's not working anymore. And so they'll come and see someone like me or someone like you, and they start to learn, and that's all we are. I always teach people that, you don't rely on me. It's I can guide you to a certain way, and it helps you to kind of guide yourself back to yourself. And you have this path that who knows where it can go. It's really boundless. So I wanted to ask kind of one more question before we start to wrap it up. I want to talk about being on TV naked. I personally don't watch TV, so I've never seen it. But I
even watched it before I did it. So they approached me and asked me to do it. So I hadn't even watched it. I had to watch it just so I could figure out what the hell I was just getting myself into.
Yeah, tell me about it.
Yeah. So I had a friend actually nominate me. So I'm kind of quite immersed in that whole survival skills world, particularly in Australia. A lot of people who practice rewilding and ancestral skills. And a friend of mine that I knew quite well recommended me to this TV show. He'd actually done it. And so they reached out to me because I think they have trouble getting women on the show. As you can imagine, it's an American TV show. And so they have a lot of the kind of like ex-army guys and people that are like, yeah, I can battle against nature like man versus wild style. Whereas in they struggle, I think to find some women. And I watched the show and it was really interesting because it was very much a traditional survival culture type of show. I've had some really good friends watch it, and it's good fun. It's good fun. Like you watch it and it's that classic like American, two women in the wild, blah, blah, blah. I get, as if I was part of some action series. And I knew going in that I was going to be a total oddball in that environment. And it was great because the producer said to me at the end of it, once I did the experience, he said, "We've just never seen anyone do this like you." But I thought that was a really beautiful opportunity because, when I zoomed back and I thought, do I really want to be part of this show? Is that a kind of, is that a culture I want to be part of? But when I did the experience, it was such a unique opportunity to be able to demonstrate a very different way of relating to the wild in a survival context. And I ended up going to South Africa. So the TV show, the whole principle of it is that you get put in the wild naked with only 2 items, and you have to survive 21 days is the kind of standard. They've got a fan challenge, which I think is less time, and longer challenges too. But the standard one is 21 days. And you don't get a thing. They give you 2 items. You don't get food, water, shelter, any assistance with anything, and you're naked. And so the idea behind it is you kind of sign up, and I found out 10 days before I was meant to go that I was going, and they sent me to South Africa. And I didn't know anything about South Africa until I kind of got there. Apart from just a little research that I wildly did in those 10 days. Yeah. But you don't know where you're going until they plonk you there, and you're kind of in the middle of nowhere. And you are with one other partner. So the principle of the show is you get stuck with one other person. But I had a bit of a twist in our episode. It was an extended one because it was called a tribes challenge. And so there was actually 2 other people out there that halfway through we had to go and find them and then all survive together. Sadly, one of them tapped out, so it was just 3 of us at the end, but we made it through the 21 days. And it was a really different experience for me that you got to understand doing these shows is that there's often a narrative that they'll pick, and that's kind of part of the storyline. That's part of making any kind of expression of TV or media or movie or anything. It's what makes it interesting. And as it turns out, the big narrative that I got chosen for my kind of story, my episode was called There Will Be Blood. And it was all about me actually getting my menstrual cycle when I was on this survival challenge. And it became this big blow up thing. It was like one of the most played clips in the whole season because I really openly talked about bleeding in the wild, but I didn't talk about it from the lens of, this is a massive detriment, this is a setback, this is going to ruin my experience. I used it as an opportunity to talk really openly about the somatics of it, how we can connect to the land in this really embodied way as women. And in a survival context, which is traditionally about taking from the land, taking what you need to survive, within like day 2, I was in a place of deep giving. I was like, all right, I give my body, literally give my DNA to this place. And at an even scientific level or a biological level, like my blood contains nutrients, contains vitamins, contains all the things that, animal blood would. And I'm literally giving that to the earth. That is fertilizing the earth in a very measurable way. And it's my gesture of an offering, let's say, as a prayer to be able to receive and to be able to be taken care of. And so in those first few days, it was really an opportunity to enter into that cycle of reciprocity, which is our innate human state. We can tell that just by the fact that we breathe. We inhale and we exhale. We're giving and receiving. And so I talked about that. and that became the big storyline of like this woman bleeding out in the wild in South Africa, which was, of course, going to be a little bit vulnerable at first when the entire world is like, has an insight to this most sacred time of a woman's cycle. But it was a brilliant opportunity to actually reshape the way that we relate to our bodies as women, particularly at that vulnerable time, which has traditionally been shamed or wronged, especially in the context of a survival situation where like you got to be on, you got to be sharp, you got to be physically active. And I used that time to just go really slow and talk about why I was doing that, and talked about, the seasonal nature of a woman's body. And then, came my springtime, I was ninja with my machete, and I built like the producer said to me, he's like, man, you built like the Taj Mahal of shelters. I'm like, yeah, I know. Shelters is my jam. And just, it was beautiful to be able to be in that space. By far, the biggest challenge for me wasn't any of the survival stuff. I felt really taken care of by the land as a kind of result of that. Magical things would happen where I'd be talking about something and talking about, just connecting with the land and just, being given what I needed as opposed to what I always wanted. And then I would randomly come across this frog that then I'd be like, oh, perfect. And the producers said to me a bunch of times, they're like, some of your stuff was so like voodoo. It was crazy. And so I got through that experience totally fine. But the hardest thing by far was the cameras, because it's not as, I thought it was very much, you hold your own camera, but we did have a camera crew there. They don't help you at any means. They just capture it, kind of fly on the wall style. But I was not used to being interviewed and being being examined at that level. Not camera shy, but just when I'm in that state, I'm in a no mind state. It's like trying to talk to someone and interview them when they're on like plant medicine or something.
Yeah.
I was like, I am not in my brain, kind of like my mind state to be answering questions. But yeah, it was such a profound experience, and I treated it like a rite of passage. I drew a line in the sand at the beginning, as I took my clothes off and crossed that threshold, and I treated it like a vision quest, rite of passage type of experience. And day 17, I had this incredible prophetic vision of like the next chapter of my work and my life, which was equally as exciting and also terrifying. And ultimately, that's when I came back to Australia, like parts of my life just totally started to implode. We can't reorient to that. Because what I've learned, not just from that experience, which was incredible, but from, in relationship to so much of what you've shared, when you just follow that natural impulse, what I have learned is that when you start to open your nervous system to be more receptive to the natural world and the way it wants to move you and communicate with you, when you become more embodied, more nature connected, life begins to move you. It begins to move through you. And so those like, oh, I just feel like I want to open a surf school. I could hold on to the ego, to the identity, to the way my ego wanted to move me in life, or I could access this deeply surrendered state. And that I just keep doing that over and over. It's like, that's what life is, the jam is for me now, is just opening wider and wider and allowing life to move through me. And it takes me in places that I didn't expect to go a lot of the time. But I'm always taken care of when I follow that. Otherwise I have ended up in the situation where I've followed my ego. I've built the sandcastle while, everything's fine at the time. And then suddenly the sandcastle comes melting down when it gets, the wave comes in. And I've had that experience of, following what I thought was, and that actually not turning out to give me happiness. Lots of people who have made their millions, done amazing in their career. I see it all the time, particularly in women. Like I've worked with a lot of women who charge on and have this incredibly successful career, and seemingly there's purpose in it. Like, I'm not saying that it's lacking purpose, but at some point they stopped allowing life to move through them and then took control over it.
Yeah.
And that ends up leading into a big burnout stage or lack of fulfillment. And so even though it feels like sometimes this kind of chaotic journey of, okay, now I'm being led over here. Okay, now I'm being led over here. Just like how I felt in the wild, it's you start to allow life to move through you. And there's this incredible sense of faith that comes out when you practice that over and over. One of my teachers talks about it shifting from the map of survival to a completely different map. And what that looks like is when we're in survival, we believe that we have to be in control all the time. And there are certain circumstances where that's helpful, but that often leads to adrenal fatigue. It's what leads to all these health issues. It's what leads to all this lack of fulfillment when we feel like we have to be in charge all the time. And when we can surrender and open, that's when we're in survival, as I was going to say. It's like we believe we're in charge of our survival. But when we actually completely let go and we surrender to the fact that death is imminent, death is always here. I have no idea when I'm going to die. Can I be at peace with death of my ego and of my physical body eventually? Well, then I can live without fear of death. And I can just let myself be guided by this pulse of life, this animate force of nature that wants to move me in life. And when I do that, I'm always taken care of, always. And I feel radically fulfilled because it's like, oh, wow, this is an adventure.
Yeah. And it's one of those, that initiation, that death initiation is something that we lack in the westernized culture. Yeah. And that was an important part of all the traditional cultures. Yeah. And so at that, pretty much from child to adulthood, there was the initiation that then they didn't fear death anymore because they'd been there. And so you see so many people that fear death but don't live life. And they look at people like us and go, oh, their life is chaos. And but it's organized chaos.
Yeah.
And there is a structure to nature. Nature isn't just everything in a straight line. There is no real straight lines in nature. Everything is like this. And if you're looking sometimes at male, but if you look from a broader viewpoint, it's beautiful and it's magical. And I do hope that more people start to realize this and I can't say before it's too late, because everyone has to go through the shit. Sometimes you look as a healer and as a coach, you're like, oh, they're at rock bottom. And you're like, well, actually, they're not yet. But I think is their rock bottom is only their mid-level. They've got to go deeper so that they can reawaken their soul and learn more about who they are. And so it is quite, interesting it's kind of like people like me and you, we're drawn to each other because we're like, hey, you're one of those. Yeah, it's like you can see that.
Crazy people too.
You've still got your life force showing, and you've got that. And people are drawn to people like us when they hit that point. And it's the same as me. I'm not saying I'm better than anyone. I go to teachers when I hit a crisis point, and I'm like, this is the person, this is the book, this is the song, this is the tree, this is the bird, whatever it is. It's going to help me get through this moment and support me to that next level. And there's always those teachers around us, whether, as I said, it be nature or a person or whatever it is. And you sharing your story about the, your cycle on an American TV show. Could you imagine the type of people that watch that? And the women would have just been like, it would have changed their life, because a lot of women are hardened. Yeah, and it would have softened them at some level. And for men watching it, they would have been like, oh, I don't want to not, because it'd be awkward for them. This is an awkward moment. I want to not watch the TV show, but I'm also encapsulated. So in that moment, it's like the flashlight being shone on them.
Yeah, it was an incredible social experiment, I'll tell you that. Being able to I haven't read them all, but like people have shared some things with me, like being able to read the comments online of YouTube clips and other things, and it's been such an incredible social experiment, and very cool even for me to actually see the amount of work that I've done, because I've journeyed really deep with my menstrual cycle and that body acceptance and things. That was actually a big part of my health crisis when I was younger. And so it was nice to feel not flinched by that at all. But yeah, wow, what a social experiment to see where we're at globally. I'm in my little bubble, particularly where I live in Byron Bay, and these conversations are really normal. But for a large majority of people, it's a very sensitive topic still, and it's very taboo, and it's really uncomfortable. And that was really obvious by the comments. But I actually got quite a weird kick out. Because I'm like, the sick, twisted part of me is like, yeah, I really fucked him up. You like,
yeah. Boom, take that.
And that's a part of my ecology too, the provocateur. Like, even though it was all deeply sacred and all the things, and it's like, sometimes we need a bit of a shake-up, and sometimes we need to feel really uncomfortable. And even though that's, some of that feedback was from women being like, just, not an approval, or not happy with that.
You're not supposed to say that or do that.
Yeah. I feel like it was there's a sick part of me that likes being able to shake it up in that way.
I had that part inside of me as well, where it's sometimes, I don't know, my soul just likes to, just poke. Because I think it's because it gets people to feel. And that, even if that emotion is anger or annoyance or frustration or whatever it is, it's getting people to move emotions in their body. And when we get movement inside the body from emotion, then we can move into other aspects of ourselves. Whereas we just keep it down and no one's going to poke the bear, for example, then people, in my personal opinion, is we're doing people a disservice.
Oh God, playing nice is like the most disserving thing, I don't know if that's a word, but is the greatest disservice to others. And, there's, on the flip side, you can also be poking people from ego, from like some arrogant.
I've done that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. But like when you're doing it from, I've had many situations where I've been like guiding groups and even one-on-one, where I've felt that impulse of life, that chaos energy that is literally the creative energy behind everything. Like, it's the big bang. It's the rupture of the seed bursting through its hull, the seedling bursting through its hull. That is what creates transformation. It's the cracking open, And I've often felt that, you need to say this to them. You need to push on that bit. And, I know when it's true because my ego isn't getting off on it. My ego is going like, really? Okay, we're going to say the thing. And I just do it. And that's the greatest service, because when we override the pulse of life that is naturally guiding us to support this person or this situation, which is ultimately about healing part of us, then if I'm not doing that, then I'm actually robbing life. I'm robbing the moment, for everybody. Everybody, I'm not ultimately not trusting life.
And it's far too common. We lose that part of ourselves.
Yeah.
And I do think that, there's always people that go first. And they go first, and then that opens up that, that person said that, or maybe I also feel that. but I didn't want to say it. Oh, maybe I can say that, or maybe I can do that. And I always think what's a real funny one that I think of? And I don't even know if this story is true, but it was like when they were testing trains back in the day, and someone was like, "Oh, a body will implode if they go faster than this," and someone was like, "I don't think they will," and they got on the train, and their body didn't implode, and there's always these things that people think is the limit, or the peak experience of humanity, or whatever it is, the peak expression. And then there's always someone that's like, oh, I reckon we could go maybe a little bit further, or we can. And sometimes it ends in disaster, and sometimes it ends in magic. And I think that's the beauty of life, is sometimes we will push ourselves too far, and that's what kids do. They'll fall over, they'll scrape their leg. They might have to take a few days off running or whatever it is, but then they'll get back at it again, and they'll okay, well, I've hit that boundary over there, but what about this boundary over here? And they're always looking for that. And I hope that as humans we start to play in that arena a little bit more. And because it is, for me, my life is beautiful. It's magic, and there's the ups and downs and the sideways and who knows what way what life is happening, but that is
wild.
It's what it is.
That's what it is to be nature. Full circle is that's what it is to be a nature human being, to be an ecological being. My work that I ran was called Wild Woman, and I talk about rewilding, and I think it's a flippant term that's kind of tossed around. What does it mean to be rewilded? And for me, wild doesn't mean you have to go and run away into the bush and, wear bare feet all the time and drink wild water all the time. Like, those things are great, but it just means having access to the full ecology of you and to be your fully expressed authentic self in whatever's true at the moment, and let yourself have full experiences. And that's wild. That's to live an untamed life, is to live in the way that nature would. Let yourself have the full breadth of experience, and let yourself have your ups and downs, and let yourself be a victim and a rescuer and the hero and and let yourself be the villain, and learn from these experiences. And I guarantee, when you're on your deathbed, you'd be like, I'm glad I gave it such a good crack,
What's the saying? It's
going unturned.
The saying, we'll finish up now, but the saying is, when you go into your deathbed and you go in the car around the corner and that's I've done it, I've completed it. And I really love this interview, and I definitely think we should have another one in the future, because we only just covered a few things, and we could talk for hours and hours and hours. I'll put a whole bunch of information about Brittany in the show notes, and this has been a really great interview, and I think there'll be a lot of people that will question things, and that's what I want. Is we talked about what if everyone was well? How would the world change? How would your life change? And I think if everyone was well, one of the first steps is to start to reconnect and to listen to those little flutters, to listen to those parts of the body, and to open those up. And that takes you on this journey, for no better word, into living, into life. And then wellness is a part of that.
And what I want to add to that is completely reframing what well is, because we could easily see that well is good. Well means that we're healthy, we're happy, we're perfect, everything's all la-di-da. And I love those times as well. But for me, if I zoom back and I'm like, well, what does it really mean to be well? To be well means to be at peace with all of it. It's can I be well when I'm, crying on my bathroom floor and in a big mess and just feeling overwhelmed, and I've gone beyond my edge. I'm beyond the range of my nervous system, and I'm learning something really big. For me, I had just an experience the other day where I was really in tears, and then today I'm, in my creative jam. And for me, I'm like, that's a well life. Yeah. That for me is what it means to be well. And the more at peace I can be with all of that in me, and approval of that, then the less it has to scream really loudly in the outside world for me to pay attention to it.
Mm.
You know, and if that's how we can embody our own wellness and create wellness in the world, by bringing that perspective and awareness and approval into our own lives.
Beautifully said.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for coming on this interview, and look forward to chatting in soon, maybe even meeting in person. Maybe not leaving another
decade.
Awesome.
And hang with your goats.
Yeah. Sweet as.